Hello there, ladies, gentlemen, and all variations thereupon. What do you do if you need to sneak into somewhere and you're not allowed in? While you miniaturise yourself. Like Ant-Man. This week we're going to be making a tiny mini-me.
Now, as you can see, I've already made a mock-up out of paper, and there are some things I need to adjust on there. The legs seem a bit wide, a bit chunky, and the arms a bit thin, so I'm going to have to make some adjustments as I transfer it over to the felt. And before I can do that, I need to take the mock-up apart, and because I've taped all the pieces together, rather than using any kind of permanent method of attaching any glue or anything, I can just cut the tape and lay them out flat. And as you can see, in order to create a 3D structure out of a 2D shape, I've had to create darts in there. To create the dart in the paper, I've cut out triangle sections and taped the two parts either side of the cut together. When we transfer to the felt, I'm not actually going to cut, rather I'm just going to sew the two halves over that triangle together. So as I transfer onto the felt, I'm going to add on seam allowance for most parts, except where it's a bit chunky, like the legs, in which case I'm just going to take the outside of the template that was the mock-up as being the size with seam allowance, and where the darts are, I'm going to mark them on in the chalk, but I'm not actually going to cut them out. So in sewing the darts up, I'm going to pinch together the felt so that the triangle that I've marked out, the two sides of the chalk, touch each other, and sew it up. We're going directly from one side of the fabric to the other and pass it back through, so it's similar to a running stitch. And the reason we're doing it this way around is so that the thread won't be visible too much on the front. Some of the threads I'm deliberately going to make visible, but not the darts. Another thing that I couldn't find was my embroidery materials. I've got the hoop, but I haven't got any of the embroidery thread or my embroidery needles or anything. So rather than embroidering on all the details as I was planning on doing, I'm going to have to cut out the details in felt and sew them on. So I have to make a Batman symbol, the elements of the face, the eyebrows, the eyes, the mouth, which when it comes to the Batman symbol, fairly easy. When it comes to the face, it's a fine line between looking like a face and having a slight cuteness to it and just being nightmare fuel. Much easier if you embroider, but if you're cutting it out on felt, while it's quicker, there is a danger that it's going to look horrific. So moving over to the sewing machine, we want to sew all pieces of fabric to the right sides together, which will mean that the darts are facing outwards when we sew. So the darts will be facing either down to the sewing machine or up directly at us. And what I'm trying to show here is the direction in which we have to sew everything together. We need to make sure that all the seams where we've sewn the different types of fabric together are all going to be facing inwards once we've turned it inside out. So as you can see with the foot, we have to make sure that it's all folded back over itself while it's in its flat 2D shape, so that when we finally reach through and pull everything the right way around and make everything to the 3D final constructed shape, all of those inside seams are all facing inwards. And when it comes to sewing the two halves of the body together, I'm going to use a black thread which is going to definitely show through the majority of the stitching. I'm just going to do one stitch all the way around. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want it to look a little bit homemade and patchwork. So because this is going to be a gift, we want it to look like it's actually been homemade, something that's been made with love and care and attention. And the easiest way to get that feel across is just to make it look like one of the old-timey patchwork dolls. So it's going to have one seam, one big black seam that goes all the way around the outside of the body, showing where the two halves have been constructed together. We need to cut the very edges of the felt, being careful not to cut the seams that we've just sewn, so that when it turns, it'll turn more smoothly. And when it comes to poking through the limbs, we want something long and preferably dull. So rather than using scissors or anything with a sharp point, I'm using a crochet hook just to poke all the way through and get everything turned. So we're going to stuff the doll with regular cotton wool, and if I were to just put the chunks of cotton wool in there, it can get a bit dense and a bit hard. So I'm going to break it up and loosen it a bit, but then overstuff a little bit, so that when it squashes down, it won't like over deflate, but there won't be so much stuffing in there that all the limbs are rock solid. So you got to try and get a balance, and the easiest way to do that is to pull apart the fabric as you're putting it in and then slightly overstuff. Now, when sewing on the details, some of the details I'm going to sew on in the very obvious way, where I've got an obvious black seam against the yellow Batman symbol here, so you can see exactly how it was sewn on and making it look homemade. When it comes to other details, however, like the face, we want to keep the stitches hidden, because if we see the big stitch lines, around the face, then it is going to look like nightmare fuel. The way we hide the seam is to take up a little bit of the fabric from underneath where we're sewing on, and then pass the needle through to the other side, and then whip stitch around using a matching colour thread to whatever we're sewing on, and take up a little bit of the material directly underneath again, and keep going around like that, and then it hides all the stitching in the same colour of the fabric. Now the final part of the head, what we're going to do is stitch it so that once we've turned it inside out, so the face is facing the body, onto the front of the fabric. Now before we sew the back of the head on and stuff it and make it solid, we're going to take advantage of the fact that it's got no head and mark out a size of shirt that we're going to put on. This is a shirt from a thrift store. It's not quite the same as mine, but it's close enough. And I'm going to measure out the fabric using the doll, and I'm going to make sure we've got one big rectangle that's twice the length that I need, whilst being the right width, and we're going to mark out two smaller rectangles that are going to attach around the arms to make the sleeves. The easiest way to make a shirt like this is to just fold it in half, mark out where the head's going to be, cut a hole for the head, and then sew the rectangles that are the sleeves directly on before you sew the sides up. Now the advantage of using this kind of fabric with the checker pattern is that you can use the horizontal lines to match up where your sleeves line. Going over to the sewing machine now, we're going to sew everything together, right sides together. So, as we've already sewn the head on so that the face is facing the Batman symbol as it's all flopped over, we're going to take another piece of material which is the same colour as the hair. This is slightly lighter than my hair, but you know, closest I could get. And we're going to cut this out in much the same way as we did with the face section. We're going to sew that all the way around the top of the head and the sides of the head so that the hair covers the face, and then we turn it inside out and stuff it on the inside so that the face is now facing outwards. And finally, with the head all stuffed, we do a quick little stitch around the back of the neck. I'm not too bothered about hiding it because again, I want some of the seams to be visible.
And then we have it, a miniature Bridget. Now the shirt does still need to be hemmed, but that's only a little bit of hand hemming and you don't need to watch me do all that. But it's a nice little homemade doll, bit of a voodoo doll. Thing to remember, if you don't want your arms sticking out to the side, you need to make sure that they're in the right position when you're sewing. I deliberately did it this way because it looks like she's about to give out 3 hooks. There we have it, the miniature Bridget, ready for hook time.